Hello, everybody. So, if you are looking to figure out how to really set up the JFrame and all its parts in terms of creating the actual JFrame, connecting it with the timer, and being able to draw in 2D using the draw methods, then what you want to do is watch the JFrame plus animation set of videos. The first video should explain how essentially I got to this point. In this tutorial though, this is mainly kind of working with sprite-based programs and games. So many of you may be creating stuff with sprites, right? So if you're creating something like, I don't know, Legend of Zelda, Frogger, um, Asteroids, no, Galaga, all those types of games, you can consider them sprite-based. And so what you really want to do is kind of have a whole bunch of images on the screen, which is where this project setup is going to come into play. You guys should have seen this when we did Duck Hunt together. So let's go ahead and get going, right? So again, the main panel, watch the first set of videos if you want to know everything that's got to do with this. The first set of videos also includes tutorials on adding your mouse listeners and keyboard listeners, so you can jump back there and just incorporate those in here. Now, in this project setup, I'm actually giving you a class. This class is called the Sprite Class. So essentially, it's set up to kind of work with images so that the whole idea of loading them and updating their position on the screen has been done for you. But the only thing that's new here that's kind of like outside of the subset of the AP exam is the fact that it's an abstract class. This is really because of the fact that I'm trying to encourage you to create your own classes that extend this class, right? So I want you to use inheritance for this project. So you should be creating child classes that extend the Sprite class. But let's see what we got going on here. So we've got an image instance variable here. That's going to be the main image that you see on the screen. Technically speaking, if you wanted to expand upon this, you could add more images. So for example, if you have alternate looks for your character, if you have a different image that you want to use when you're going up, down, left, right, etc., this is where you can kind of include that. The constructor for the sprite class takes in the file name, right, which is just a string, and then it's using these helper methods, get image and its xy. Again, that just kind of help initialize that image, which is what I'm trying to simplify for you. And then below here, you've just got a whole bunch of helper methods and getters and setters. So nothing too fancy there. We probably don't need that reset command. The other thing is that these are set as protected. So in other words, if anything extends this class, they will have direct access to these variables. You will inherit the variables, right? Because they're protected. Anything public or protected, they are considered inherited. So now let's go ahead and create a duck class. So what I want to do is create a duck class that is a child of the sprite class, and I just want it to load a duck image on the screen. So duck. Okay, so to set up the connection between the duck and the sprite, remember you want to extend that class. And then what it's going to say is that, oh, since the sprite class doesn't have a default constructor, a constructor that doesn't have any parameters, it requires you to kind of specify the non-default constructor for the duck, which is fine because, you know, you want to be able to create a duck object with a specific file. Recall that the call to super has to be the very first thing that's called. And so if you have additional lines of code that you need to run for the constructor, you want to do it right after the call to super. The call to super is going to invoke the constructor of the parent class, which is, in this case, would be this. All right, so far I think we're pretty much golden. The sprite class also includes the paint method. The paint method, of course, is how you paint the actual image on the screen. All right, so now the main panel is where everything is drawn, right? So the main panel is your JFrame, and you're adding stuff to the JFrame. So we're gonna add it as an instance variable, doc d is equal to new doc, and then my file name is actually doc.gif. So if you wanted to declare and instantiate the objects, you can do it in one line here, especially if it's something simple. But if you're trying to practice kind of like for the AP exam, you want to create the objects in the constructor of that class. So in this case, in the main panel constructor down here. So I'll just create it down here. So doc is equal to new doc. But again, if you really wanted to take that shortcut and do it all up there, you can. What? Oh, I called it D. All right, so now that we have an object, right? So as soon as this main panel runs, we know that the paint method, if it runs, that it would have set up this doc object already. And so now we should be able to just call the paint method of the doc object. And when I click play, what we should see is your doc is in the top left corner, right? So the X and Y for the sprite is actually going to be the top left corner of your image. In order to kind of simplify the math, what I would suggest everyone does is you want to just go ahead and set your sprite to the actual width and height that they should be. So that you're not having to do it in real time in Java. Sorry, I thought my dog was being weird. But technically, if you wanted to, there is a scale method that you could do, but it's one of those things where you have to call scale all the time. So if you wanted to, you can change this scale, but you may have to call it everywhere else. So if you want to play around with it, you can look it up. I don't really suggest that because it might mess up with the rest of your math, especially if you're doing collision later and any of that mess. And then the other things that you should probably set are the width and height. So once you have an actual width and height, you want to set that here. So width is equal to, let's say, 100, height is equal to 100. And that should reflect the width and height of your actual sprite file. The width and height is going to be important, of course, in addition to the X and Y location, so that if you're doing collision detection later, what you see on the JFrame should be what is represented behind the scenes by the instance variables. And I mean, that's pretty much all you got, right? Yeah, I think that's what we, cool. So there you go. If you want to then connect that with keyboard commands, with mouse commands, you can watch the other sets of videos, which kind of deals with JFrames and adding those listeners. Thanks.